Swimmers are trying to create as much speed as possible to make it to the other side of the pool as quickly as possible. That requires optimizing the entirety of the stroke rather than maximizing any one component. Specific to the finish of the stroke in freestyle, that's the point in the stroke where swimmers' hands are moving their fastest, and it's the point in the stroke cycle where swimmers achieve their highest speeds. From that perspective, it makes sense to get as much out of the finish as possible, yet that's not what swimmers do. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Despite having the highest hand speeds and despite having the fastest body speed, swimmers don't maximize the finish of their stroke in freestyle. Instead, they try to optimize it to help it fit within the context of the whole stroke. During the finish of the stroke, the hands are moving at their fastest point within the pool. While swimmers can use that to try to create even more propulsion, they can also use that hand speed and carry it into the recovery, and that means the recovery is going to be a lot faster and it's going to be a whole lot more effortless. And so that's where the trade-off emerges. The more swimmers try to finish their stroke, try to fully straighten their arm, they're probably going to be able to create a little bit more propulsion. However, the more that they straighten their arm, the more difficult it's going to be to fluidly transition into the recovery of the stroke. If they fully straighten their arm, the hand is going to lose all its speed. They're going to have to literally pick their arm up, drag it forward. In contrast, if they start the finish early, the elbow is still going to be bent, the hand's still going to have a whole lot of speed. It can just slide right out and whip around, and that's going to create a whole lot less effort, and it's going to create more speed through the recovery. The other consideration is that the more swimmers straighten their arm during the finish, the less surface area they're going to have that's moving backwards. And so the more swimmers try to finish their stroke, they will create a little bit more propulsion, but that amount of propulsion becomes less and less, and the consequences of continuing to straighten the arm become more and more in terms of the negative impact on the recovery. So the finish of the stroke is all about optimization. Swimmers are trying to create as much propulsion as possible for as long as possible, and they're trying to do that without compromising the recovery of the arm. If they do that, they're going to get a whole lot more tired, a whole lot quicker, and that's going to ultimately slow them down in the long run. So that's the concept of what swimmers are trying to do. Let's take a look at how they make it happen. So we'll take a look at some middle distance and distance swimmers first, as it's a little bit easier to see. However, in sprinters, we will see the same behavior. So if we watch here on the right arm, we're going to see here the elbow is bent, and then the elbow is actually going to exit before the hand, and you can see that the elbow is still very bent at that point. She's going to finish right about at her hip. If she wanted to, she could straighten the arm, probably get that midway down the thigh, but that's not what she chooses to do. Instead of pulling straight back and fully straightening the arm, she gets as far as she can. She's still got her whole forearm facing backwards, but when she gets to the point where it becomes more and more difficult to do that, that's when she's going to start to slide out, transition into the recovery, and you can see she's got a whole lot of hand speed as she's exiting the water, and that's going to make it really easy to carry that momentum into the arm recovery. If we look at the other arm, we're going to see the same thing. It's a little bit different angle, so you can appreciate what's happening from a slightly different perspective. You can see that the elbow is very bent there, and then she's again going to pull it out right about the hip, rather than trying to fully straighten it and fully getting as much as she can out of the pull. She's going to compromise the pull in order to optimize the whole stroke by enhancing the recovery. So again, we'll see here, she's definitely leading with the elbow. The hand is not going as far back as it could, and that's going to allow her to smoothly transition to the recovery, and that's going to optimize the whole stroke. So another swimmer here, we can see that the elbow is very bent. It's going to stay very bent. And again, he's coming out. There's going to be a little bit of extension at the end, but he's bringing the hand out much earlier than he could have. The elbow is leading it. He's not fully straightening the arm. And you can see that the hand just swings through. It's going to swing right around, and that's going to make it a whole lot easier for him to get into the next stroke cycle. And we can see on the other hand, the hand disappears there right about hip level. And again, it's going to be the same thing. Elbow leading the pull out, the pull stopping short. And again, it's all about the trade-off. From this position, he could straighten his arm down to mid-thigh, but that's going to bring the hand speed almost to a stop, and then it's going to be very difficult to recover. So he gets as much as he can out of that pull and then transitions into the recovery. And so throughout this pull, you can see the whole forearm is facing backwards, and he maintains that position pretty much to the very end. And so at this point, he's not going to be able to do that much longer. And so if he did straighten his arm, it's pretty much just the hand facing back. So there's going to be a huge drop off in propulsion anyway. It's going to be a lot more effective to easily get into the next recovery, which allows him to get into the next stroke, which he can create even more propulsion. So all about trade-offs again, more about optimizing the whole stroke cycle rather than trying to maximize a given component of the stroke cycle. So different angle here, we'll see the same thing. The elbow is very bent here, and then boom, that elbow is exiting out. The hand is exiting out right about the line of his suit, maybe a little bit below that, but certainly not down near mid-thigh where it could if you wanted to. So we'll see the same thing again here. Elbow remains bent. The elbow is now out of the water. The hand is starting to follow it. And so you can see he's got a lot of hand speed, a lot of arm speed as he moves through the finish. And that's going to allow him to recover that really quickly. So in the sprints, having a really fast recovery speed is really critical in order to maintain a fast cycle rate. And then in the distance events, they still have to maintain a decent tempo, but efficiency becomes really important. So they're trying to make sure that they're not maximizing the finish so that they can have nearly effortless recoveries, which is going to be really important for conserving energy so that they can continue to race at a high level. So again, elbow remains bent, elbow is coming out, and then the hand follows. So it's not about finishing as far back as possible. It's about finishing as far back as optimal. If anyone has an incentive to maximize propulsion, it's sprinters. And so if anyone's going to exhibit a fully straightened, a fully maximized finish, you'd think it'd be the sprinters. However, that's not what we're going to see. And so you can see elbow is still bent here. He's not finishing as far back as he could. He may be finishing a little bit further back than the distance swimmers do. And again, we've got different incentives at play here, trying to maximize speed versus trying to maximize efficiency and speed. And so you're going to see a little bit straighter, but they have to keep a really fast cycle rate. So they're going to optimize the finish rather than maximizing it. And you can see here, elbow is very bent. He doesn't fully extend there. He's not going to fully straighten the arm. And again, you can see that here, he's pulling the arm out right when he's no longer able to keep his whole forearm facing backwards. There's going to be a big drop off on propulsion, so it's better to bail on it, maintain the hand speed, get into the next recovery. And so we'll see that again here. He's going to keep rolling with that, and that's going to be the way that they're going to optimize the finish rather than maximize it. So another sprinter here, and we're going to see the same behavior. So if you watch that left arm there, you can see the elbow is bent and it's coming out right about where her hips are, not mid-thigh, which is what she could do if she straightened her arm fully. So same thing in front of us. We've got the elbow bent. The elbow is leading the recovery. The hand's exiting around the hip level. And again, it's all about trying to get as much propulsion as possible. She's still got her whole arm facing backwards up until this point. She's not going to really be able to do that beyond that. So she bails on it. And if we watch the hand speed, you can see that the hand speed is maintained through the exit, through the finish. And again, that's going to allow her to quickly whip the arm around, get it in position to create more propulsion in the next stroke cycle. So again, optimization of any component of the stroke is more important than maximizing any component of the stroke. And if swimmers want to swim fast, they have to figure out how to manage the different components so that they can create as much speed as possible. While the principles of fast swimming are the same regardless of the stroke, when swimmers are on their back, how those principles are demonstrated changes. The shoulder is not a symmetrical joint, so swimmers are going to have to execute different skills to effectively finish the stroke, create a lot of propulsion, and transition into the next stroke cycle. Faster backstrokers do it better. The finish of the stroke is all about trade-offs. Swimmers are trying to create as much propulsion as possible for as long as possible, but they also have to smoothly and effortlessly transition into the recovery of the stroke. An ineffective finish of the stroke is going to compromise the amount of propulsion swimmers can create. It's going to negatively impact the recovery of the arm, or it's going to do both. In freestyle, swimmers exit the water without completely straightening their arm. That allows them to create a lot of propulsion, but it also allows them to smoothly transition into the recovery. In contrast, backstrokers actually completely straighten their arm. They do so during the finish of the stroke, and they maintain a completely straight arm during the recovery over the surface. This happens due to the range of motion available to the shoulder and the timing of the stroke. While completely straightening the arm in freestyle makes it more difficult to recover the arm over the water, straightening the arm in backstroke actually makes it easier. Finishing down and straightening the arm helps to push the shoulder and the elbow towards the surface of the water, which creates the momentum necessary to get the whole arm recovered out of the water. When on their stomachs, swimmers can lead with the back of the elbow to maintain the arm speed out of the water. However, that option isn't available when swimmers are on their back. So instead, they need to find another solution that helps create a little bit of momentum to get the arm out of the water. The solution they find is to finish straight and to finish down. Let's take a look at how elite swimmers make it happen. So the first thing we'll pay attention to is the straightening of the arm at the finish. So if we watch down here, there's the arm and it's going to be completely straight. When you watch freestylers, you'll see that the arm remains bent as it exits, but that's not what's happening in backstroke. And so we'll see, again, complete straightening of the arm. The hand is going to finish down, but what you'll see is that starts to push the shoulder up towards the surface. That also starts to get the elbow moving up to the surface. And so now we've got the arm moving in the right direction in terms of recovering over the water. And so again, by pushing down, that gets the shoulder up, that gets the elbow up to the surface. And now the arm has a little bit of momentum, and you can see that the shoulder continues to go up, and that allows swimmers to quickly and effortlessly swing the arm over the water. If backstrokers were to try to finish straight back from this point, then the arm would end up straight, just like it does here, but we wouldn't see the shoulders moving up, we wouldn't see the elbows moving up to the surface, and that's the key part that allows swimmers to generate the momentum they need to swing the arm over the surface. Now if we watch the other arm, we'll see the same thing. The elbow gets completely straight, the whole arm is completely straight, the hand is going to move down. And then as you can see, as the press down, the elbow, the shoulder start to pop up, and that's how swimmers can start to generate some momentum. Again, there's no way to maintain the arm bent and then transfer it up over the surface. And just as importantly, they can't finish back because that's going to have the arm come to a complete stop. And in both cases, swimmers are going to have to muscle the arm out of the water, which is not going to work. So instead, they're going to press down a little bit. That naturally straightens the arm, and it gets the elbow up to the surface. You can see it pops up there. Now it has some momentum, and then allows swimmers to swing it up and over the surface. And you can see as the arm straightens here, shoulder is going to rotate up as well. And at the same time, the left hand is going to enter the water. That's going to drive the left shoulder down, which also drives the right shoulder up. So hand is finishing down, pushing the right shoulder up, and then the left hand is finishing in, driving the left side down and the right side up. And that's going to provide that right arm with some momentum so that swimmers can swing it up over the surface. Other added benefit is as the swimmer finishes the stroke here, the hand is still moving backwards. They've still got some hold on the water, so that allows them to create a little bit more propulsion, because as the hand is entering on the left side here, there's obviously no propulsion on that side, and by finishing there, we can get a little bit more propulsion, and then the swimmer can get on it on the left side with less of a gap between the two arms. So swimmers are going to finish down, they're going to finish straight, and that's going to allow them to create a little bit more propulsion, and probably more importantly, that's going to give them some momentum so that shoulder pops right up to the surface, the elbow starts to come up to the surface, and then swimmers can effortlessly swing the arm over the water. So we'll see the same thing here from a different angle. So the swimmer is going to pull here, they're going to finish, and they're going to finish down, and you can see the elbow pops up, the shoulder pops up as a result of that finish. And as we talked about in the previous swimmer, as the left hand finishes, the right hand enters. That's going to create more rotation, and so the timing of the two is really, really important, because as the one hand's pushing down, the other arm is driving into the water, and that's going to get the pulling side shoulder up to the surface. You can see that the elbow pops up right to the surface at the finish of the pull there, and now they're in a position to swing the arm effortlessly over the water. Same thing on the other side. You can see the finish down, you can see the press there, and then the pop of the shoulder and the elbow, and that's going to allow a really smooth transition over the surface. And especially with backstroke, they're going to recover the arm straight. They're already in the position that they need to be when recovered over the water, and that's going to allow them to more effortlessly and more easily transition into the recovery. So again, finishing down here, popping the shoulder up, popping the elbow up, and then on the other side, doing the same thing, pressing down. And you can see that snap there. That's going to facilitate the transition to the other side. It's going to facilitate the arm up to the surface. And again, that makes it much easier to recover effectively. Another swimmer here, and we're going to see the same thing. So boom, finish down. And as the finish is down, you can see the rotation up. The shoulder comes up to the surface. The elbow comes up to the surface. And then we're also seeing the entry on the other side there. And that's also going to facilitate the rotation. Holding water all the way through, that allows swimmers to create a little bit more propulsion. But most important is that movement there, the pressing down really makes a big difference in terms of getting that shoulder up, getting the elbow straight, getting the elbow up to the surface. It quickly goes from down to right up to the surface, and that motion is going to give the arm some momentum, allow it to bounce out of the finish and then right into the recovery, which is going to make it a lot easier to execute. And so again, if swimmers were to pull out at this point, they're really going to struggle to have any sort of momentum with the arm. If they were to try to pull straight back and then finish straight back, they're not going to get that torquing movement that's going to get everything rotated up. So again, finishing down slightly is going to be really important, and it's going to be important to help swimmers recover the arms effectively and to create more propulsion. The arms are going to completely straighten in contrast to freestyle, backstroke, and breaststroke. And the key difference is that because swimmers are on their back, they're still going to have to execute effective skills, but they're going to have to do so in a different way because of the anatomy of the upper body. So the more effectively swimmers can straighten their arm during the finish, and the more they can have a downward trajectory to the finish, the faster they're going to swim. Just because butterflyers recover their arms straight over the water during the recovery doesn't mean that swimmers should straighten their arms during the finish in anticipation of that recovery. In fact, doing so can be one of the biggest mistakes butterflyers can make that compromises their speed. Let's take a look at how butterflyers should finish their stroke in order to create as much speed as possible. There are two goals that swimmers have to achieve in order to optimize the finish of their stroke. First, they want to create as much propulsion as possible for as long as possible. When both arms are recovered at the same time, swimmers can't create any propulsion with their arms, and so speed is going to fall. The more body speed swimmers can carry into their recoveries, the less that body speed is going to drop. And the more propulsion they can create, the more speed they're going to be able to create. So swimmers want to create propulsion for as long as possible. At the same time, recovering both arms over the water is physically challenging. And when the arms get tired, it becomes very difficult to hold the stroke together and to maintain speed. So the more effortless we can make the recoveries, the easier it's going to be for swimmers to sustain their speed. How can we do that? Well, the more hand speed swimmers carry into the recoveries, the easier it's going to be to just swing those arms around, which means it'll happen faster, and it means it'll happen with less effort. The challenge is that if swimmers pull back as far as they can, hand speed is going to drop off to almost zero, and that's going to make it very difficult for swimmers to recover their arms. At the same time, if swimmers stop their pull early, they may be able to recover their arms easily, but they're not going to create as much propulsion as possible, which is going to limit their speed. So they have to find a solution that allows them to create as much propulsion as possible and allows them to get as much hand speed going into the recovery. Let's take a look at how elite swimmers make that happen. So if we watch this swimmer here, what we're going to see is she maintains a really effective surface area for as long as she can. So when she gets to here, she's still able to use her whole forearm and her hand to move water backwards, but past this point, it becomes very, very difficult to do so. And as that surface area drops off, so too is the propulsion. And so while if she continues to pull the arms straight back at this point, she can probably create more propulsion. She's going to create less and less the further back she pulls. So there's diminishing returns. At this point, hand speed is also really fast, so if she stops the pull at this point, she starts to transition to the exit. She's going to have created a lot of propulsion from all the way up here to all the way back here, and she's going to have high hand speed. So if she transitions at this point, it's going to allow her to accomplish both of her goals as best as possible. And the transition from the pull here to the recovery itself is going to be relatively quick. And so she's maintaining her hand speed here. She's just kind of letting the hand slide out, and that allows her to get as much propulsion as she can, again, from all the way up front to all the way back here. And then this part of the finish here, she's still going to get a little bit more as the hands are still under the water, but she's primarily transitioning to the recovery. And if you watch the elbow position right here, the elbows have already exited the water. So swimmers aren't going to straighten their arms under the water. That's only going to happen once the arms are out of the water. And so the hands slide out. And again, because the elbows have come out first, because the hands are following second, and because the hands are moving against the resistance of the water, once the hand clears the water, the arm is just going to snap straight, and that's going to allow for the swimmer to swing the arm forward with a ton of momentum. So again, swimmers are trying to pull for as long as possible with as big a surface area as possible, but they're not trying to maximize the pull in terms of getting every last bit of propulsion out. At some point, they have to bail because they're going to start getting less and less propulsion as they continue to pull further back, and then they have to start transitioning and preparing for the arm recovery. And if they can do that well, they can still create some propulsion from about here to there. It's not going to be nearly as much, but it still will be some. And because the elbow is out, once the hand lets go of the water, then the whole arm is going to snap straight. It's going to swing around, and then boom, she's out in front and she's ready to go again. And so the big idea is that it's not about maximizing the pull here. It's about optimizing the pull and optimizing the recovery of the arms. Swimmers are still trying to create as much propulsion as they can, but when they have less leverage towards the end of the stroke, when it's only the hand that can be effective at creating propulsion, now swimmers start to prepare for the recovery in order to create a fast and effortless recovery so that they can start pulling again, and that's going to allow them to create more speed and do so in an effective and an efficient way. So we've got another swimmer here, and we're going to see the same thing. So again, the elbows are right at the surface now, and then they're exiting, and then the hands are going to straighten as they come out of the water. So the swimmers are not trying to finish the pull. They're not trying to fully extend the arm. The elbows are exiting, and then as the hands exit, it starts to straighten a little bit, and then they fully straighten over the surface of the water. So the elbows are going to exit first. Swimmers are not going to fully extend the arms. And so if we can imagine here, we're in this position here, and then the arms fully straighten. How's the swimmer going to get the arms out of the water other than lifting them out, which is going to be very physically demanding, and they're going to get tired really fast, and they're going to lose all their speed, all their momentum. So it's all about the trade-off of creating as much propulsion as possible for as long as possible, but they still have to prepare for the recovery, and that means they're going to have to stop the pull short. They're going to have to lead with the elbows out of the exit, and then the hands are going to follow, and then the hands are going to straighten when they get out of the water. So swimmers are still able to create a ton of propulsion from here all the way to here, but they're not going to create as much propulsion as they could have if they fully straighten the arm. But they're still going to get most of the propulsion, and they're going to get the benefit of the smooth and effortless recovery. So one more swimmer here holding a ton of water from the front of the stroke all the way to the back, and as he starts to run out of room to use the whole arm, we see the elbows start to exit, and then the hands are going to follow, and you can actually kind of see as the hands come out, the arm goes straight, and then he's into the recovery over the water. And so holding water for as long as possible, and then once the surface area starts to drop off, swimmers are going to start to get the elbows out of the water. They're going to start to transition the recovery. The elbows will straighten to some extent. They're not going to fully straighten. And then once they recover out of the water, once the hands release the water, the arms are going to snap straight, and they're going to swing over the water. So just like in every other aspect of swimming, it's not about maximization, it's about optimization of the different components. And so here, holding water for as long as possible with as much surface area as possible, but once that surface area starts to drop off just because of the anatomy of the shoulder, then it's time to start transitioning into the recovery while trying to maintain as much hand speed so that the hands can be thrown over the surface of the water with as little effort and as much speed as possible so that swimmers can get back to creating propulsion with the main propulsive movement, which is going to be the pull in this case. And more specifically, it's going to be the pull from about here to about there. That's where most of the propulsion is going to come. And at this point, it's about continuing to create some propulsion, but more importantly, we're transitioning into the recovery so that the hands can be recovered effortlessly and quickly over the surface so that swimmers can get into the next stroke. Just because the arms aren't straightened in breaststroke doesn't mean the finish of the stroke is any less important. In fact, it's just as important in breaststroke as it is in every other stroke, and it's important for the same reasons. Swimmers have to create as much propulsion as possible, all while managing the transition into the recovery, and the more effectively they can do it, the faster they'll swim. In many ways, the finish of the pull in breaststroke is more difficult to manage in the other strokes because it doesn't have as clearly defined an ending. Just like every other stroke, swimmers have to move water backwards in order to move themselves forwards, but in breaststroke, they have to recover the arms under the water versus over the water. That means swimmers have to cut the stroke short in order to transition to the underwater recovery, but knowing exactly when and how to make that happen is more challenging. That being said, the trade-offs remain the same. The further swimmers can pull back, the more propulsion they will create, But the further they pull back, the further they're going to have to recover the arms under the water to get back out to the front of the stroke. And because the arms are going to be moving against the resistance of the water, that's going to create a whole lot of drag, which is going to slow swimmers down. And to make matters worse, because of that drag, it's going to take a lot longer to get the hands out in front. That's obviously going to have a negative impact on stroke rate, but it also makes it much more difficult to execute effective timing. And in breaststroke, timing is everything. So swimmers definitely don't want to do anything that makes executing great timing more challenging. There's one more aspect of the finish that's unique to breaststroke that's also a consequence of recovering the arms under the water. In order to smoothly transition from the arms moving backwards to forwards, swimmers are going to have more of a lateral component to their pull, especially the end of the pull, in order to get the elbows in so that the hands are forward so that everything can move forward. The more effective that lateral component of the finish, the more effectively swimmers are going to be able to create propulsion for as long as possible and smoothly transition into the recovery. So we have the same trade-offs here during the finish, just like we do in the other strokes, but by adding the underwater recovery, we've added a new dynamic to it. Let's take a look at how elite swimmers solve that problem. So we'll take a look at everything with a couple different swimmers from a couple different angles to get a broader sense of what's happening. The first thing to pay attention to here is we'll see is that the elbows basically come into the body. The elbows tend not to move past the torso or behind the torso, and they tend not to end up in front of the torso. And the reason that is just like in the other strokes, swimmers are powering the pull by bringing the elbows into the body. They're opening their armpit and then they're closing their armpit, and that's what's creating a lot of the power that moves them down the pool. And so we're gonna see that same thing here, is that the elbows do need to be brought into the side, and that movement is powered by the chest muscles, the pecs, and the back muscles, the lats, and those are going to be the strongest muscles in the upper body. So that's why swimmers use this motion, is because it allows them to take advantage of those muscles. So again, and so if the swimmer was to pull here and the elbows would end up behind her torso, she's not going to be using those stronger muscles. She's not going to be creating much propulsion by that point, because the forearms and the hands, as you can see here, are no longer facing backwards. So to continue to pull back is just moving the arms backwards. We're not getting much more propulsion, but we're going to make it a lot more difficult to recover the arms forward here. And you can see the elbow, the upper arm is in line with the torso. And so she's got to move everything forwards from here. And so if she was even further back than she was right now, that's going to be that much more movement she's got to make forward against the resistance of the water. So if we take a look at the pull again here, and let's say that she only brought her arms about that far back, and so the elbows are still in front of the body, well, she's not creating as much propulsion as she could. It'll be a little bit easier to recover the arms forward. There won't be as much resistance. It won't take as much time, but in that case, she'd be sacrificing propulsion. And so again, it's the trade-off. How much propulsion can swimmers create? How little drag can they subject themselves to when they have to recover the arms forward? And a lot of that is going to be about finding the sweet spot. And what's the sweet spot? It tends to be bringing the upper arm, the elbows, in line with the torso. That's going to allow them to use the strongest muscles of the upper body as much as possible. She's able to get her forearms and her hands facing backwards for as long as possible. And so she's still in a good propulsive position here. And then she's transitioning into the recovery at that point. And so right when she's about to lose that position, right when she's about to no longer be able to pull backwards with the strongest muscles, that's when she transitions forward. And you can see that there's going to be a rounding. The elbows come into the body, there's that lateral component, the hands start to turn up, and then everything is going to be recovered forward. So the more that swimmers can figure out how to pull back effectively, how to pull back optimally, not too far, not too little, and then round off that pull in order to transition into the recovery, that's going to be the ideal goal. And in terms of rounding off the pull itself, if we get into this position right here, this is basically a butterfly pull. And so during butterfly, what the swimmers would do is they just continue to pull straight back. And if it was a butterfly pull, what swimmers would do is they'd continue to pull back, they'd straighten the arms. Whereas here, she's going to get to this position and then she's going to squeeze in as opposed to squeezing back. And so that's going to still create some propulsion, but it's also going to transition her into the recovery so it can be as smooth as possible. Again, if she was just to pull back and then try to move the hands forward, that's going to cause a problem because she's going to get stuck with the hands way lower than she wants. So she's going to get into an effective setup of the stroke, very similar to butterfly, and then instead of pulling straight back, it's going to be more of a squeeze in, which again will still move the arms backwards, but there's that lateral component which again sets her up to recover the arms forwards as smoothly and as effortlessly as possible. So we're going to watch a different swimmer here from a different angle to gain a different perspective. So he's going to set up the stroke here, and then this is kind of the butterfly position that we just saw in the previous video. And from here, squeezing in, and so you can see the armpit is really open there. There's a ton of space between his upper arm and his torso, and then that space is going to gradually close. The elbows are going to be brought in, and you can see the upper arm is more or less level with the torso. He's not going to bring the arms completely in because that's going to make it more difficult to recover forwards. But then from here, now he can just transition everything forwards and he's back into the next stroke cycle. And so same dynamics as we just saw with the other swimmer, just from a different angle. So we've got the most propulsive part of the pull right here. Then he's going to squeeze in with it. That's going to be the transition to get the arms forward while still pulling back. You can see the upper arm is still moving back. The hands are still pointed down towards the bottom of the pool. The forearm is facing backwards, squeezing in. And then once he's run out of squeeze, basically, everything starts to move forwards. And that's going to allow him to, one, recover smoothly, but two, create as much propulsion as possible. And the key thing here is to watch how everything is smooth. The hands don't rush in, the elbows don't rush in, everything's patient, everything's moving as a unit, and then he shoots everything forwards after that. So creating as much propulsion as possible by pulling for as long as possible, using as big a surface area as possible, and then using the strongest muscles of the upper body, the pecs, the lats. And as he starts to lose effective propulsive positions and he starts to run out of room to move the arm back, then he starts transitioning everything in, and he starts to move everything forward with the recovery. So relatively simple skill in terms of what needs to happen, not necessarily easy in terms of executing it, because swimmers have to figure out how much is optimal, too little, not enough propulsion, too much, compromised recovery. And it's all about finding the sweet spot and making that happen as effectively as possible. Another swimmer here using the same basic skill set, adapting it to their own physiology and their own structure. So we'll watch here is there's going to be a pull in, and you can see elbow is in line with the torso, the upper arm is in line with the torso, and then he's going to transition forward there. So he's creating as much propulsion as he can through the pull there. And again, once he runs out of room, once he brings the arm into the body, then he's going to transition forward with the recovery. And so during the pull, there's going to be this portion that's moving everything back. And once he runs out of surface area, right about there, once he runs out of room to pull into the body, that's where he's going to start to transition, get the hands up, get everything moving forwards, back into the front of the stroke, and ready for the next stroke cycle. So we've taken a look at 3 different breaststrokers. They all use the same basic skill set. They express it slightly different because they're different swimmers and they're very physically different, all 3 of them. Yet they're going to use the same basic strategy, which is trying to pull for as long as possible. But then as soon as they run out of the opportunity or the ability to keep the arm facing backwards, they're going to make sure that they're transitioning into the recovery. And once they lose the ability to pull back because they brought the arm to the side, again, that's going to facilitate the transition. And rather than trying to pull back as hard as possible, everything is moving into, they're squeezing in. 1, because that allows them to power the pull, but 2, it allows them to smoothly transition into the recovery. So a huge part of the finish in breaststroke is finding the optimal time to make sure that the pull is cut off and making sure that the transition from the pull to the recovery is as smooth as possible. That allows swimmers to create as much propulsion as possible, create as little resistance as possible, and that allows them to create as much speed as possible. Just because swimmers aren't directly using their arms to create propulsion doesn't mean there's not a finish during underwater kicking. In reality, many swimmers are cutting their kick short, and that's significantly compromising the amount of propulsion and therefore speed that they can create. We're going to talk about the finish of the stroke in underwater kicking. Specifically, we'll be talking about fully finishing the kick in front of the body. This is a critical component of creating speed underwater because swimmers are moving their feet incredibly fast and they've still got effective propulsive positions. That allows them to move a lot of water. That allows them to create a lot of speed. Unfortunately, a lot of swimmers are focused on keeping their kick rate really, really high. And while that's certainly important, it's also important for swimmers to ensure that they're maintaining an effective range of motion through the kick as well. It's not just kick rate that creates speed. It's not just the propulsive range of motion that creates speed. It's having both at the same time, which is what ultimately allows swimmers to create so much speed underwater. Let's take a look at this key skill in action. So the key point to look for is the finishing position of the feet relative to the rest of the body. So if we watch here, the feet are going to kick down and the feet are going to be in front of the chest. The chest is going to be pressed a little bit forward, and so the chest is going to be in front of the hips, and so the feet are well in front of the hips, but they also remain in front of the chest as well. So it's a term I originally heard Russell Mark refer to as kicking through the center line, and so that's really what it is. Through the center line of the body, the feet are going to be well in front of that position, and that's going to be fully finishing the kick. A lot of times swimmers will finish the kick in line with the body, and that's not going to get them as much as they can out of each kick. So as we watch here, the feet are going to continue to be well in front of the hips. The feet are definitely in front of the chest as well, and that's going to be a full finish of the kick. So what's so important about that is that the feet move past the body. So that's going to be important because as the feet move past the body, they're moving very, very quickly. And they've still got a good angle on the water. As you can see there, the feet are still pointing backwards. So that's going to allow swimmers to create a lot of propulsion. Secondly, you can see here when the kick finishes, that's going to result in a change of posture. And so that presses the chest down a little bit, pushes the hips up a little bit. And then that movement, when swimmers reverse that, when they snap out of it right there, that's going to generate a lot of the power that moves down the body and then results in a fast and effective kick too. So not only is finishing the kick going to create more propulsion per kick because swimmers are able to get more out of each kick from here to there, it's also going to set them up for the next kick by putting their body in a position where they can start that wave of undulation, let it travel down the body, and really snap through. As you can see, right when the kick finishes, that's going to move the hips up. It's going to move the chest down a little bit, and then when swimmers reverse that motion right there, that's what generates the wave of undulation. That's what powers the kick itself. So the finish of the kick is going to be really, really important for creating propulsion in that kick itself, but also setting up the chain of events that leads to more propulsion in the next kicking cycle. So this swimmer in particular has a pretty strong arch in their back. The feet are well in front of the hips. And so different swimmers, that's going to look a little bit different, but what we're looking for is the overall trend where the feet are well in front of the body, and that's ultimately going to be a position of an effective finish of the kick. So if we watch another swimmer here, what we're going to see is the feet end up again well in front of the body, and you can see here too, the feet are going to kick down, and then you're going to see the change in posture too. Hips go back, chest goes down, and then when the swimmer reverses that, again, that starts that wave of undulation. And that wave of undulation is going to power the kick. So again, the feet are going to finish well in front of the hips. They're going to finish in front of the chest as well. And that's going to allow swimmers to get more propulsion out of each kick and then set up the next effective kick with effective undulation. So again, kicking all the way through, kicking down, you can see that the feet snap through to finish there. And again, that's going to pop the hips up, press the chest down, and now we've got ourselves in a position where the actions of one kick can set up the cycle for the next kick. And that's where you get swimmers that have really good rhythm, they can keep the rate up, and they can also get really good range of motion because they're using the finish of one kick to set up the next kick. And so, of course, these dynamics don't just happen on the stomach, they happen on the back as well. And so we'll see here, boom, there's the kick, the finish of the kick, and the feet are going to end up well in front of the chest, and they're going to end up well in front of the hips as well. And so we can watch too, we see that flick through, then we get the chest pressing up, we get the hips pressing back. So while many swimmers will actively lift their chest to help power the kick, when they combine that with the finish of the kick, we've got two different movements happening at the same time to magnify the impact of one. And so by finishing the kick effectively, again, it helps set up the next kicking cycle by creating that wave of undulation, putting swimmers in a position where they've got it set up. And so now all swimmers have to do is reverse out of this position, and then they've got that wave of undulation traveling back down. It sets up the next kick, and then it goes on and on and on. And so again, the finish of the kick from right here to right there, snapping everything through, allows swimmers to create that much more propulsion, and it helps them set up the next kicking cycle as well by adjusting the body posture, putting them in a position to start a wave of undulation. So another swimmer here, we'll see the same thing. And so if we look at the finish of the kick here, the feet are well in front of the body, the feet are well in front of the chest, the feet are well in front of the hips. This swimmer, relative to the others, doesn't have as much of an arch to the back. Their hips aren't as far back, their chest isn't as far forward, but we're seeing the same thing. And so we'll see the same dynamics of the position too. You can see, boom, the finish of the kick, the hips go up, the chest presses down. However, it's not as much, but it's still the same motion, it's still the same idea, it's still the same timing, it's just going to be a different magnitude of effect. And if we look at the foot position here, this swimmer actually has their feet well in front of their chest. Again, that's most likely because they're not pushing their chest forward quite as much, but we're still seeing the same range of motion as the swimmer moves through the kick. And so again, feet are ending up well in front of the body, and you can even see that in the swimmer down below. That's not the focus here. They have that same skill happening, and again, that's going to allow them to create more propulsion. It's going to allow them to set up the next stroke cycle, and that ultimately is going to lead to faster and more efficient underwater kicking. Another swimmer here, different expression of the skills. We're still going to see the feet well in front of the chest and well in front of the hips. And this swimmer has a little bit more hip action. The hips are pressed a little bit further back. The chest is a little bit further forward. But again, same exact dynamics. The feet are finishing all the way through. When the feet finish, the hips go up, the chest goes forward, and then that process is reversed to set up the next kicking cycle. So again, full range of motion through the kick, kicking all the way through, kicking in front of the center line, kicking through the center line. That's going to allow swimmers to finish their kick. That's going to help them create more propulsion, and that's going to help shift their body position so that they can create an effective undulation, which will power the subsequent kick.